Hi, this is János, and today I'm going to continue exploring the differences between older and more modern sensor technologies. And as usual, I will be using the Canon 5D Classic as the camera for the older technology, and I will be using the Leica M11 for a modern sensor representative. And I know it is not the latest camera, not the latest Sony, or not the latest Nikon, but the M11 is still like year 2021, and it features a truly amazing modern day sensor with the capabilities that the 2020s can offer people, and it's an absolutely wonderful camera. Sadly, I don't own it, but hereby I am just focusing on showing its measurements. The only acquaintance I have with this camera is through looking at the photos that people take with this camera, and I find them kind of beautiful, and it's true, Leica does have its advantages, and a lot of it come from the amazing lenses that they have, and I will expand on that as well when I compare it to the Canon 5D. That when you take photos with the 5D Classic, can you take similar photos as you are taking with an Leica M11, or when your photos don't turn out the way they would have turned out with the M11, then what is the difference, and what could you do to elevate your standards to get closer to the M11? So let's get into it. So what I want to focus on today, what I want to share as well, is a little journey into the low light capability of sensors, what is low light, and this is something that's truly fascinating for me at least, but it has just so much more aspects to it than what people expect. So without further ado, let's just get into some of the basics here. So what we see is this is DxO Mark's website, the DxO website, and DxO Mark, and they did a ton of camera testing, and actually that's why I'm using the Leica M11, because they do not have the latest camera measurements yet. So the latest Sonys, you won't find them in their lineup, so I'm just forced to use what they have as the relatively most recent camera technology. And other than that, I'm also using the Leica M11 as an example, because its sensor, I would say the how the sensor is voiced, or what kind of color palette it has, it's really very close to Canon's. So Leica, according to some rumors out there on the grapevine, it has a lot of influence for its color technology from Kodak, and according to the internet as well, the 5D, when Canon developed their digital sensor, they worked very closely with Kodak. So Kodak was developing the color technology for the Canon digital sensors. And previously I had made a video where I showed how the individual color pixels, the red, green and blue, how they are filtered. It's extremely close between the Canon 5D and the Leica M11. So if you want to have that kind of color imagery as you are getting with an M11, then a Canon 5D is a pretty close guess at a much more acceptable price range. And so that's something that if one does not have access to a Leica M11, then and you want something similar in the to have pictures similar in their entirety as you get with a Leica M11, then Canon 5D is not that bad according to the color science. Even though the Leicas use a Sony sensor, but the way they program it, the way they are computing the data from it is much closer to what Canon does on their 5D classic sensor. So when we go into the measurements, what people are familiar with is like the dynamic range, tonal range, and color sensitivity. That's what is mostly talked about, and that's what people know what it is. And also at the signal to noise ratio at 80% grayscale. Now there's this called full signal to noise ratio, and this is actually the one that's going to give us the most data about the sensor technology, more than any of the other. And this is purely talking about how much data the sensor can read out in different conditions. So what are these different conditions? So 1% grayscale and below, this means that these are conditions when there's barely any light and very poor contrast situations. So this, when you go towards this and go there, I mean there, here in this range, these are the really difficult situations. And these are the situations that when you take a normal photograph, then in the majority of the photos, like let's say you are the average photographer and you take pictures for your own benefit, you are not someone specializing in low contrast photographs, or of course if you specialize in low contrast, low light photography, you are most likely going to stay here in this range of this spectrum. But that's highly unusual. That's in an average photographer's average photo, anything like 2% grayscale or below will be a very negligible parts of the image, if any. Same goes like at a 95, 98, 100% grayscale, which is like the super bright, super high contrast parts of the image. Like 100% is where like getting close to, that's like saturation. And if you go beyond 100, then you have overblown your image. So anything between like, I would say like maybe like 2% to 95%, that would be what is contained in 95% of the photos that we take, or even more than 95% of the photographs ever taken. And actually what I'm going to just summarize it now in a few words, that basically what the cameras could do 20 years ago, which was the Canon 5D Classic, and what the most amazing cameras can do today, the Leica M11, between the 2% and 98% range, it hasn't improved at all. Actually, I'm going to show you with the numbers that within the capability of the cameras where it was designed to, actually the Canon 5D resolves better than the Leica M11. how can it be? So we look at the numbers, but this was just the summary. And this, I think it's kind of mind-blowing, and a lot of people would say that this cannot be true because the technology has advanced so much. The Leica M11 sensor is just light years more advanced than the 5D sensor was. It is not possible that the average part of the photograph that we take, like an average photo, there the Canon 5D reads out more information per pixel than the Leica M11 sensor reads out. But yes, it's true. However, when does this apply to you? And why this is a good news, but only a good news to very few people. It doesn't mean that if you don't know how to take a photo, then you won't be able to capture this range of the camera. Why? That's because you have to set up your camera that when you take the photo, then your information is between the 2% and the 98% grayscale equivalent or contrast equivalent range. If it's not there and you need to adjust, need to do some Photoshop work or raw editing to bring up and down the brightness levels, the gamma, whatnot, then you have lost the advantage, because that's where, especially in the dark, you see that in the dark here the Leica is just extends like to 0.01% at the low ISO settings, and when we go to the 5D it just extends to 0.1%. So, and then the Leica did expand one beyond, so that's like 10 times information content for the Leica at the low contrast regions. So it's like able to detect an order of magnitude more in the extremely low contrast range than the 5D does. So once you have overexposed your image with the 5D, and you want to bring up the shadows with the Canon 5D, you can't do it, because you would need this range of the measurements of the photo to bring up, and you don't have this. Partially, I think it's not just because of the sensor technology, but it's because the 5D Classic only has 12 bits per pixel, and the Leica M11 and most digital sensors today have 14 bits per pixel, and those 2 bits are the ones that extend these lines further from here. So you see, this line just continues from here, and now it gets steeper, and for the Leica it just goes out and continues straight to a much lower degree, and that's because we have more bits on the lower end, so it can extend to that 0.01 range. And in addition, why we have here this extra line on the Leica, why is it going higher than what the Canon is doing, is because the Canon 5D Classic only has 100 ISO max setting, and it doesn't have any lower ISOs. Like if we go at the Leica, the blue, that's the 100 ISO, but it also has a 64 ISO setting. And when I said that what is the capability between the two cameras, is I mean it among the same parameters. So when we look at ISO 100, then what the equivalent ISO 100 with the 5D Classic, and comparing it to the 100 ISO of the Leica. And And we can go to the most extreme, will be the 3200 ISO of the Leica, which is here, this dark blue line, and that's the lowest of the Canon. And the 5D Classic does not have any higher ISO than 3200 because it was really at the end of the film era, and in the film era we had 1600 ISO that was tops. And that's why in the 5D Classic, when you set the ISO, the highest ISO is 1600, and then the 3200 is called the letter H, like high ISO extension, because there's no film equivalent to that. So it was produced in an era when they wanted to have a film equivalent in digital, and they didn't even think of getting any more higher ISOs than 3200, because for two reasons. One reason was that there was no film equivalent to that, and the other one is that when we are going higher with the ISO, you see these lines, this is 100, 200, 400 and 3200 down there. So as we rank up the ISO, the sensor per pixel will be available to resolve less information. So you see here, with 3200 ISO, we have 32.5 dB signal to noise ratio peak tops when it gets the most sensor, the highest contrast scenario, 32.5 dB information. And at 100 ISO, then we get 43.5 dB. So that's like 11 dB more information when we are at 100 ISO. And this is not just true for the Canon 5D Classic. When you look at the Leica, you see the same thing. As you go from the highest ISO, then you go lower, the available information content, when the sensor is fully saturated, it's capturing maximum amount of light, will be less and less and less. And this is why you want to use the lowest ISO setting available to you that you can get by, because it's going to give you an image that can resolve more contrast and more information. Because look at that, if we use the Leica M11 at the 50,000 ISO range, then at full contrast situation, it can resolve just under 17 dB at full saturation, 17 dB. Let's see, what would it be at 100 ISO? 17 dB would be like 0.2% saturation. So basically the amount of detail resolution that stops for your lowest ISO setting is something that is closer to the absolute lowest level setting at the high ISO range. And bingo! There's no magic in here, because it's the same sensor, right? What you have at the 100 ISO, as a almost black pixel, which has very little contrast information, very little signal in it, that is the level what your brightest pixel will be when you are using the 50,000 ISO setting. And basically what we are doing here is with this high ISO setting, we are taking this low value as not the other end of the sensor's sensitivity, but as the top, and then we are going down even more compared to that. And And that is just something that as the sensor technology evolved, meaning how do we read out information from the sensor, there was a demand to keep up ramping up these ISO values, but it doesn't mean that just because your camera has super high ISO, it will take the same amazing picture quality as it takes at 100 ISO. No, it will take absolutely garbage, shitty images at those really high ISOs compared to the same camera's low ISO setting. So basically what I did is I made a little table. So I read out values at 98% grayscale, 20% grayscale and 2% grayscale, because these are like three values, like the 2%, like this here would be what is a low contrast dark area of a photo you take like every day, click, that would be 2%. 20% would be something that's like the middle, like the majority of the picture you have would be around that range, and 98% would be really bright area that close to pure white. And I read out the 100 ISO curve of the Leica and the Canon 5D, and I read also the 3200 ISO curve of both Leica and the Canon 5D Classic. And that's because these are the highest and lowest values that the Canon can take. So looking at the identical settings of Canon, how the identical settings of the Leica compare. So when using like the same parameters, like an equal footing, equal opportunity, direct comparison, so I'm comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges, but apples to apples. So the 100 ISO apple and the 3200 ISO apple, then what is it that we see? And I was just absolutely flabbergasted by what I saw, because I expected that the M11 will just absolutely trash and kill and butcher and murder the 5D Classic, and quite the opposite happened. That of course, as we look, this is the little table that I generated reading out the values. 98% gray, signal to noise ratio at 98% gray. For the 5D Classic we have 43.5 dB, which is a lot. And then when we go to 20% and 2%, it gets less and less and less. And that's because there's less amount of light available hitting the sensor. So that's why when you have a low contrast area, you are going to get much less information out of it, because there's much less information to capture. So the difference between these is given because there is less information hitting the camera. Still, we want to know how much information we get from both of these scenarios, because it's going to tell us how good the camera is in these situations. And when you look at it, when we are at the low percent, like very low contrast, few light situation, then the Canon 5D reads out 0.6 dB, a little more than half a dB more information than the Leica does. And I didn't expect that. I expected that the Leica will murder the Canon. However, where the Leica murders the Canon is, let's bring back this here. So this 2% belongs here, like in the blue line, around that range. You see there it says like 1.2% SNR, so it doesn't refresh very well, and it took me ages to compile that table, because you have to like go away and then come back and then just hit it at the right point to give you the exact number. So really not easy. But anyway, so we are here, and when we are here, which is, let me just show you something here. Let me just take down the background. So here, when we are looking at the darker parts of the image, maybe there, I think that might be something like a 5% level, so not even 5%, but in that range. So we are getting to the darker range, or there, for example. This is where Canon 5D Classic will give you better quality. And now I just have to stop a little bit because I have to take care of something, and then I will continue from here. Bye bye.